to Spinning Wheels, where after 11 episodes, we have proved beyond any reasonable doubt that motorsport comes in all shapes and sizes. But above that, and behind the cars, the races, the famous victories, it's the people, Guy, who make the adventure what it is.
Oh, it's been, I can't believe you said it's 11 episodes. I can't believe we're at 11 already, but
this is 12.
Oh, this is 12. Sorry, yeah, this is 12. So, I mean, it's been a blast. I mean, it's been great because actually for me, you know, catching up with old mates and colleagues, it's been really good, especially in lockdown when, you know, everybody's kind of been cooped up inside. So I've been able to sort of chat with everybody and hear some of the stories that, as we said, have not heard before. It's been fantastic.
Really good.
Today's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to today's guest. We only do legends on this show. So
another world champion, no less.
Don't build me up too much now.
Genuinely though, Guy and I have been bowled over by the response to this. We basically just wanted to spend some time talking racing and racing cars, and it turns out that quite a few of you did as well. So thank you if you've subscribed on iTunes or wherever you download your podcast, or you've watched the show on YouTube. We're also on Facebook now, as well as Instagram and Twitter, so no excuses. Get sharing these fantastic stories. And talking of fantastic stories, tonight's guest is probably most well known for his relationship, or should I say rivalry, with the late great Ayrton Senna. But I have a feeling there's a whole lot more to that story that we'll be exploring over the next hour. Welcome to Spinning Wheels, Terry Fullerton.
Hi, hello.
Terry, for you, like many other karters, karting was a way into the sport, but as your career has proved, it's been so much more. Tell us how you first got to climb into a kart.
No, I first got into a kart when I was probably 11, 12 years old, so you know, quite young. And I had the bug for racing and motorsport in general, really, from an elder brother who used to race motorbikes. Unfortunately, he got killed on his bike at Mallory Park. And so my dad kind of steered us, myself and my brother, in another direction, away from two wheels. So we ended up buying a go-kart and went practicing at a local track once a month. Really got the bug, really loved it. Got a better car, you know, started to race, and, you know, and it just went from there, really. So, yeah, that's basically it.
So Terry, did your dad race or do you have any interest in motorsport? I mean, obviously.
No, he didn't do motorsport. He came from a very poor background. There was no money for motorsport, no money for food, you know, let alone motorsport. So he actually raced a bike in his teens, a push bike.
Right.
He did that. He was in Scotland, and so he wasn't really a motor racing enthusiast. And you know, I wasn't really. I probably still aren't a real motor racing enthusiast. But I mean, there's a lot of things inside the sport where you can, you know, display your skills and things like that. That I found very attractive about it. So,
one of the things, I mean, I wanted to ask you. I mean, we'll come on to it later on, but obviously, you know, since you stopped driving, you've gone into, you've built your own chassis, you've done engine tuning, you've ran people. Have you always been quite into the technical side of the sport? I mean, obviously you're quite technically minded, and are you obviously good with mechanics and all the rest of it? Is that something that you've always enjoyed doing?
Well, when I was actually driving myself, you know, originally all the equipment was prepared for me, all the decisions were made for me about what equipment, etc. And I basically just drove it. But as I got older, when I got into my late teens and early 20s, I kind of took over some of the decision making, and, you know, what equipment we'd use or what equipment I'd use. And eventually I ended up tuning my own engines and, you know, preparing my own karts, designing my own karts, getting them built in Italy. So the more I went on in karting, the more I was actually in control of. And that seemed to be just a natural progression. And by the time that I was involved with Ralph Furman and you know, I'd been through that process. So, you know, I had quite a lot of experience, quite a lot of knowledge about what was going on. Yeah. So it was a gradual process through my driving career, just starting to do more and more and more. I mean, at one stage I was actually, you know, designing the car, preparing the car, tuning the engines, driving the van, putting up the awning. You know, at one point I was doing virtually everything and driving, you know. So I kind of became a bit of a jack of all trades inside karting.
It's really interesting. I mean, we're kind of doing this all a bit ass about face, but one of the things I wanted to ask you, I mean, if you look at the way karting is today, I mean, obviously when I finished, you know, 91 or whatever, and obviously raced against yourself then, you know, I go back and look at it now, and, you know, I was kind of ran by, you know, Gillards, and obviously my dad, you know, he was kind of like, he started off as my mechanic. it was me and him, and then we always had help from Gillard's, and then in the last years at CRG. But you know, you always had that kind of relationship with, it was dad and lad. I mean, it was starting to get serious at that point. I mean, you know, we did it well, but it was still dad and lad. And when I go back now, and I go back into the paddock, I went to PF last year, and it's all gone. It's just all big teams, big trucks. It's just that's just gone. And like you said, you used to work on the karts, clean the karts, do your engines, and now the kids just kind of just sit back and, you know.
Yeah, it's certainly turned like that now. It's very team orientated, especially the top end of the European racing. Even in England now, it's basically nearly all teams at the bigger meetings. That's just the way it's gone.
Do you think the kids lose out because of that? Do you think that's a part of the, you know, I mean, obviously you do a lot of training with drivers. Do you think that's part of your apprenticeship in some respects? You know, like if you miss all of that stuff, do you feel like you're not a complete driver when you come out of it because you've missed?
Well, I mean, nearly all the guys now that are in F1 have come out of the era from teams, and they haven't come out of the era of dad and lad. So you'd have to say that it is a decent proving ground for who's going to move forward in motorsport, the top end of motorsport.
Yeah.
So it is working. I mean, the WSK races in Europe, the World Championship type races, CIK races, the pits are like mini Formula One pits, you know. Yeah. They're very, very professional, you know, beautiful awnings, they have hospitality units. The whole thing's almost like a mini Formula One pit now.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately.
But then Formula One was lower key back in the day.
Sorry?
Formula One was lower key back in the day as well, wasn't it? Walking around.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, so it's mirroring the evolution of Formula One. Really, karting's kind of mirroring it, and that for sure is what the CIK and the FIA want. They want that to be the case.
Yeah.
And you can tell that as much as they brought down the age limit for kids to do senior racing, the weight limit, they kind of want them to do their karting. They want that to be a good, you know, bit of their career, but they don't want them to stay in karting when they're 18 and 19 anymore. They want them to come out of karting at the single seaters at 14 or 15, and the rules have been adjusted to make that a reality. So that's the way karting.
I mean, obviously, kids now, I mean, like with Ginettas, they're all going in at the age of sort of 14 or 15. You can start racing Ginettas, so they're already starting to go into cars. I just think it makes it, you know, when you look at the cost of it, and the cost is the cost because it's driven by the market. But is, you know, if you're trying to get into karting, you know, the cost is so high that it's very difficult, isn't it? If you haven't got funding or you haven't got a sponsorship to kind of go from club karting to British Championship karting, it's a massive step, isn't it? But I mean, I guess that's just the way the market is. But it is very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of kids still start the dad and lad route. You know, that is the first year or two, and you know, it moves. You know, if you're going to start thinking about doing a British Championship series or something like that, some of them have to go to teams, or some of them do go to teams. Some of them don't. But once you're going to race at the top level in Europe, there's no dad and lads there anymore. That's completely gone now. And you know, there's big budgets really to run with the best teams, like £300,000 a year for karting. You know, that sort of money. You know, it's fairly absurd. But I mean, they are the numbers they talk now. You know, sort of a full year with the top teams, like minimum, as far as I know, of £250,000.
And how does that compare to a year in, say, Formula 3, BRDC, Formula 3, or F4 or something? Is there a big step up?
That what you mentioned there, I think that it's more expensive. I think BRDC Formula 3 is not that much money. It's less than that. I'm not absolutely certain. I know the F3 European's expensive, but
I mean, you go to Ginettas and for about 80 grand, Ginetta Juniors is for about 80 grand. So
that puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
I mean,
there's plenty of car formulas that are cheaper. Let's put it that way, for sure.
But anyway, so Terry, back to you. So obviously, you said you know your brother had gone into bike racing. Do you think that's maybe something you might have gone into? Had you know?
100%. Yeah, I was going down that path. I used to go to races with him. You know, I still love bike racing. It's my
favorite.
What
bikes was he racing?
He raced. It's a long time ago. Remember, it was in the early '60s. He raced Manx Nortons.
Fantastic.
Right. You remember them, Manx Nortons?
I get a lot of those at Kedwell Park.
Oh, I suppose. Okay, 350 Manx Norton. He had on a 500 Manx Norton. They're beautiful bikes.
Yeah.
And it's a real classic kind of vintage bike now, the Manx Norton.
Oh, they're big business now, especially in
I expect so. Yeah. Racing. He had two lovely bikes. You know, the year he died, his bikes were beautiful. So there you go.
So then back to the mid '60s, was it when you were sort of getting into the karts, Terry?
Yeah, I started in '65. So yeah, 65. I was actually an underage junior. My dad told a few lies to the MSA, well, the RAC, I think it's called then, Motorsport UK now, I believe. I can't keep up with the name changes, but I was an underage junior. I started in '65. I shouldn't really start till '66. But then I won the British Junior Championship in '66, so I appeared to be an incredibly young winner of that. It looked like I'd only been in the go-kart about 3 or 4 months when I won the British Championship. I'd actually done a few races the year before. Yeah, and I did 3 years in the juniors, and I did pretty well there. I won the British Junior Championship each year, and that was getting bigger and bigger each year. I raced against people like Mansell, alongside Roger Williamson. Those kind of people were around in karting at the time.
Yeah.
And there's some other people who didn't go to cars. Mickey Allen was a great driver at the time, the best 100cc driver in England. So yeah, and then eventually went on to race in Europe, did pretty well there, started getting noticed by the companies to do a bit of support and sponsoring, got some support and sponsoring, and eventually won the World Championship in 1973 when I was 20. So that was the early part of my karting career. And I was kind of bitten by the bug, you know, right at the beginning, before I even raced. I fell in love with karting and driving. So
for you to win the World Championship in '73, were you I don't know, were you the first Brit to win it, or you must have been
first Brit to win the senior British Championship? Senior World Championship. Yeah. Yeah. In those days, it was really just considered one World Championship. Yeah. I was, you know, people 16 and over racing the international category. And there was a junior World Championship, and some English guys won that around the same time as well. But I was the first senior to win it.
Yeah. It was a less commercial world back then, Terry. So at what point did you sit there in that kart and think, I want to go to the World Championship here, and it could happen? Because it must not have been as much, or was it as much on your mind then as it would be for a youngster now?
World Championship in karting, I kind of had my eyes on that from about the age of 13, 14, that kind of age. But also, I kind of set myself a goal. It was a bit of a dream at the time to be a professional driver, because, you know, at school, all the kids were talking, you know, to the careers master about what they were going to do, and they were going to be solicitors or policemen or whatever. And it all sounded boring as shit to me. That. But I love karting. I thought, I've got to try and arrange this somehow so I can be a professional driver, a professional karter. And that was a real dream I had when I was very young. And luckily, very luckily, that came true. When I was 20, for the rest of my time in karting, I was a professional. So I was lucky enough to be able to do that.
Let me tell you, there's other things they are boring as shit.
Oh, I'm sure there are, yeah. I'm sure there are, but solicitor, you know, hello. It doesn't sound like a great life, setting off on a great life when you're 16. It didn't to me, anyway.
No, I'm sat here talking to 2 professional racing drivers here.
Okay, you're not a solicitor, are you?
No, luckily not.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it.
When you went to Europe then, was it quite a big step up going to Europe, or was it kind of, or did you find it quite a natural step? Because, I mean, obviously, like in the, you know, latterly, probably after your time, when Brits have gone to Europe, they've kind of struggled. You know, done well in Britain, been really quick or whatever, and then gone to Europe and found it a real challenge.
Things have changed quite a lot over the years, and there was a big problem for English kids in the late 70s and early 80s, because the tyres in Europe and the tracks in Europe were incredibly grippy.
Yeah. And
in England, they were not. They weren't grippy.
Yeah.
They were quite.
We're on those YBNs, weren't we?
Yeah, the grip level was right down. Yeah, like when Alan McNeice raced in England on YBNs, no grip at all. You know?
Yeah.
So that was the big shock for a lot of kids when they went to Europe. Well, that's evened out a lot now. The grip level in Europe is much similar, much closer to the grip level in England.
Why was that then? Just budget in preparing the track?
The grip level was all about the tyres that were around at the time, and they used to lay rubber on the track, and you get a build-up of rubber, an inch or so of rubber around the corners. So you're running sort of rubber to rubber, and that required a different level of strength and technique to actually get around the corner fast. And the little English kids who've never come across that before, just come around, turn the wheel and bounce across the track. I've even seen people go off the track, you know, fly off the track. So, you know, that was the big adapting problem the English kids had when they went to Europe. So yeah, when I first went to Europe, although it wasn't in that era of the really grippy tyres, we didn't go well to start with.
Yeah.
We didn't even have the right equipment to start with. We didn't have our wet tyres, for instance. Back in 1969, it rained at my first world championship. We didn't have wet tyres. Yeah. So I had to borrow some wet tyres. But yeah, you learn by your mistakes. That's what we did. We learned by our mistakes, and the following year we were a bit better. The following year a bit better. And by 72, I was getting pretty good and noticed by the factories. And that's when I started to get help. And in 73, I won the world championship.
So were you ran pretty much by your brother and your dad then? You were kind of a team?
Yeah. Up until 74, I was run by my brother and my dad,
Yeah.
I love the thought that your dad came from quite a poverty-stricken background, and yet you all discovered this kind of world of motorsport together. There's something really magical about that for me.
Yeah,
I got into motorsport with my dad.
Yeah, I really enjoyed going up the ladder and learning and moving forward. That was a great experience, a great feeling. Yeah, you're right. And we lived in a council house. My dad was a school teacher. We didn't have fortunes of money at all. He spent all his disposable income on the karting, I guess. And as soon as I was old enough to work, all the money I earned went towards the karting. So I remember not buying or not putting money towards a car when I was 17, and I bought a Comet K77 instead because I needed one, that sort of thing. So yeah, it was pretty tough in those days.
But seeing your success as well, the fact that you were you were British champion, you'd gone to Europe, you're European champion, world champion, and again, it must thinking, well, it's money well spent. The sacrifices are worth it because you're getting it done on track, and you're killing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was the number one thing in my life. It was the thing I loved above everything by miles, So I'm very happy to spend any little bits of money I had on it, and it was a team effort, a little family team effort as well. So.
Yeah. The one thing I've heard you talk about a lot, Terry, in other interviews, and I know it from the way that you work with your drivers, is you talk a lot about the work ethic, and you even said that talent isn't everything, because talent, you need a certain amount of talent, of course you do, but ultimately it's talent gets you so far, but it's all about the work ethic, and that's where you really kind of say where your strengths were. So you had the talent, but you also you studied the craft. You kind of you're always looking to find the edge, whether it be in the equipment, whether it be in yourself, whether it be finding the weakness in your opponent. You kind of really studied you looked at the big picture all the time, and that seems to be where you really kind of had the edge over your competitors that were maybe a little bit just focused on talent alone. And that's when you talked about
talent. Certainly, only really can only do so much, can't it? I mean, you're gonna say, give me a guy with loads of talent but not much determination or not much of a work ethic, then of course he's not going to do very well. People are going to go, oh, he's gifted, but he's never going to win anything.
Yeah.
But the guy who's got a brilliant work ethic and very determined, and I can think of them in motor racing, these type of people, work their way doggedly to the top, and they earn their place there.
Yeah.
And if you can combine that kind of character, that kind of personality with talent, you end up with someone like Senna, or maybe Prost, or the real top guys in F1, and even Hamilton and people like that. So yeah, once you make the whole thing come together, if you can possibly have the whole thing together, that's what you're looking for. That's the package you're looking for. But the other stuff aside of talent is very important as well.
Yeah, we spoke to Stephanie Hansen, who was teammates with Prost at McLaren. And what he said when he was with Prost teammate, he kind of ran the car like he was like a business, like he was the CEO of the business. And he basically, everybody that worked for him, kind of was like his employees, and he kind of pulled all the strings. And as you said, you got to be that complete package, haven't you? You got to cover all the bases.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So after you won the world championship in '73, Terry, when did you join DAP then? So.
I joined DAP in 78, beginning of 78. So 78. I actually went to drive for Zip Karts in 77.
Okay.
They did a deal with DAP, I think, to import their engines into England and to market them in England.
Okay.
Along with that deal, I was going to drive DAP in Europe. So that's when I very first started driving them, end of 77, beginning of 78. So, yeah. And that coincided with the first time Senna came over, and he ended up being my teammate at the beginning of 78. So,
did Senna
that first meeting, if you can, the first time you met Senna?
First time I met him was in the DAP factory, the early 78. I was there helping prepare my equipment just before a test we were doing, I think at Palmer. And I met the little sort of quite a skinny kid, but with quite a light in his eyes. He was there, and someone explained to me that he was over from Brazil, but he was a paying driver at the time. He was supposed to be, I think, the Brazilian champion he was at that stage, and he was supposed to be quite good, But no one really knew how good he was or how good he wasn't at that stage. But that was why I met him in the factory. We had a sort of a mild, slightly tense, stressed chat for 4 or 5 minutes. And then the next time I had anything to do with him was at the test, which would be a couple of days later, I guess. And at the test, he was very, very fast, and you don't normally see someone come out of the blue and be that fast. So he woke up a few people that day at the very first test he did in Europe. So.
Yeah. Was he troubling you much at that point? Were you kind of at that point when you're racing together, obviously in the same team? Was he good to race against? Was he hard to race against, or was he?
At the beginning, he wasn't. At the beginning, I didn't race much against him because he was finishing a bit further down the field.
Right.
He could often put the times in, but something would go wrong. He'd have a crash or this or that. So he had a period of time where, I had to actually look at some results the other day where, I'd won a race and he'd finished 10th. And I remember a race in Japan, I think it was 78. I was in the lead of the final and blew up, but he finished 6th in that race. He was always just a little bit behind at that stage. And it was really by, although at the World Championships, he went very well in 78. So he improved by the end of the year. And he kind of, through 79, he did actually become pretty good. And by 1980, he was bloody good through that year. He was very, very good. So.
Yeah. Gareth Holt on Twitter. We've got people tweeting us and sending us their questions for our guest, Terry. And Gareth Holt says that Senna once was asked who in his entire career gave him the most satisfaction racing against. And he said you. So Gareth would like to know if that view is reciprocal from your time with
the one I enjoyed racing with most of all. I mean, from this point in time, 2020, looking back, with all that's gone on since then, and his F1 stuff and his death and his notoriety and that, I would have to say that period with him stands out above everything else, almost certainly, yeah. But then, with the day I won the World Championship in 1973 is pretty special for me. I was racing against a guy called Francois Goldstein, who was 5 times world champion or 4 times world champion up to that point. And I beat him in his home country in Belgium. So that was pretty special as well, racing against a guy like that, who was an incredible driver as well. Brilliant, very tactical, brilliant, gifted driver. So, he was kind of the best that came out of the 60s and into the early 70s, Goldstein. He was head and shoulders above everybody. And I kind of filled the gap. I was in the middle between Goldstein and Mike Wilson, who won a hell of a lot in the 80s. And I retired at the beginning of the 80s. But the end of the 70s were the Senna years, 78, 79 and 80. And they're probably my best memories, yeah. And obviously, some great memories of racing with Ayrton,
yeah. Yeah, one of the questions I've got, Terry, is about, who you think was the best. I mean, obviously, apart from yourself, of course, who you think was one of the best kart racers? I mean, obviously, you've got Goldstein, got Mickey Allen, there's Mike Wilson, Zanardi. I mean, there's a number of guys, but who would you think? Who would you sort of consider as the best?
But it depends. I mustn't put my hands in front of my mouth. I remember that from the last podcast I did. Sorry about that. Of all the guys I've raced against or seen raced or been involved with, I think the one who I would say was the best and never won a world championship, for instance, was Alessandro Zanardi. Yeah. I thought he was exceptional. Mike Wilson was obviously a brilliant driver as well. But, he unfortunately, well, it doesn't really matter, but he drove 135s in the year of the 135 category. Which is, got a few question marks around it. And there was really one team, one car, one engine, one tyre, kept winning world championships. Not just winning. Sorry?
Was it a Cali kart, Comet engine, Dunlop tyre?
Well, it was Birrell, Comet, Dunlop, or Cali, Comet, Dunlop.
Yeah.
I think there might have been 1 year where Bridgestone won, but it was a certain combination. And one of the factories, one of the teams had control of that era, really. And they weren't just winning world championships in the big race. They were first, second, third, sometimes fourth, fifth. It was a very dominated period. And Mike was there. But Mike is a brilliant driver. He was a brilliant driver, absolutely no doubt about it. He was such a winner, He'd be so hard to beat, He just wouldn't have anyone beating him, and that was that. And that was normal.
Barnsley. Barnsley lad, isn't he?
Sorry?
Barnsley lad from Barnsley.
Yeah, he is a Barnsley boy, yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? But he's a Barnsley boy, yeah. Very strong.
You touch on the tyres there, and again, I'm going to feed these questions in as we go because it works better, doesn't it, Guy, when we stick them in at the place where they're relevant. But David Kirk, again on Twitter, said, what are your memories, Terry, of Bridgestone tyres at the time? Apparently, Ian Williams winning the British Championship in '77 at Fullerton, his home track, was a big memory of his, and you were racing then. He remembers you racing then.
77. I remember a British Championship there in '79. I remember that race quite well. When the Bridgestone tyre first came out, I mean, what happened was, up until about, in a nutshell, or very quickly, the tyre story in karting was, no one had any idea that tyres made any difference from the very beginning of karting up to about 72 or 73. No one had a clue that they made any difference. They just thought they were the bits that touched the ground. They didn't make any difference. People used to argue and say, what difference can tyres make? But anyway, around about 72, 73, people became aware that different batches of Goodyear tyres appeared to be quicker. We actually had some tyres built up for one of the big races that were on wide rims and rear tyres that were on narrow rims. And the wide rim set were something like 4/10 faster, which was night and day, than the ones that are on narrow rims. And we actually thought it was the width of the rim that was making the difference. Well, you would do, wouldn't you? Because we didn't expect the tyre. But it wasn't. It was a different code on the tyre. So tyres began to make a difference then, and people started seeking out the better ones, etc. Then people started making tyres, and eventually Bridgestone and Dunlop produced a tyre. I think it was in '77, or it might have been the end of '76, beginning of '77. And they were just night and day better than anything that was around at the time, like the Goodyears or Carlisle tyres. And they were different driving style. You actually did need a different type of kart. You need a bigger tube kart. You need bigger axles. So there was a period of about a year where people were driving these incredibly grippy tyres on karts that couldn't cope with them, and drivers that didn't know how to drive on them. So there were quite a few people rolled karts, had accidents because of that. But very, very grippy, and also quite easy to drive on once you got the hang of it and once you got the equipment sorted out. Yeah. So that was the beginning of Bridgestone and Dunlop coming over into the kart industry.
And then, of course, Vega joined in later on, didn't they? Of course.
Yeah. But the real big step forward was when Bridgestone and Dunlop did it at the end of the '70s. And probably the grippiest tyres ever were on karts was that period, till about 82 or 83. And then it started to go a bit more one make. One make things started taking over. So there'd be like Bridgestone for a certain championship, and then the competition element of it died away, and tyres, lost that massive grip element that they had. Yeah. And there's something else happened with tyres as well, where new regulations or European regulations said certain things you couldn't have in tyres. So this rubber build-up we used to get on the tracks doesn't happen anymore. You just get a shiny black line on the track, and the days when you get 2 inches of rubber around the corners is gone forever, really. So, which is probably a good thing. So
I remember, like when we were doing the karting, like say with the rubber, you used to get it where you literally had to drive two wheels over the inside curb, because if you had all four wheels on the rubber, it just bogged down, and literally the cart would
absolutely, I remember that very clearly. Yeah, at Jesolo, for instance, you had to. I remember you going quick at Jesolo as well. You had to run the curbs and get the inside lights around the curbs, otherwise you were just slow. Yeah,
you almost had to brake. You had to brake a little bit earlier, but you had to get on the throttle before the corner.
Yeah,
if you were on the power going over the rubber, so you'd have to brake early, get the thing turned, and drive across the rubber up the basically on the grass. And it got to the point where they were taking the bottom of the seat out to make the seat flat, because literally the seat and everything would just stick to the rubber, and the thing would go up on two wheels. So you had to almost lock your arm, because if you didn't, the steering wheel would just literally pull itself.
That's right, yeah. You did have to lock your arm.
Lock yourself.
I remember Paul Carr standing at the side of the track giving you signs to lock your arm.
Yeah. With my dad giving me that on the other side.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know, but they were some pretty weird days for that really, really grippy stuff. Through that period of time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's good times. I mean, really, really, really good times. Did you ever try gearbox karting, Terry? Did you ever?
Not really. I mean, I drove a couple of karts. I drove a 250 once. I drove a 125 shifter once or twice. I never raced them or that.
No, because they were actually quite bigger than the old supercars. Obviously, that's what Martin Hines did and stuff. those things were pretty big back in the day. But then,
yeah, unbelievably fast. Yeah, fastest thing, I think, apart from an F1 round Brands Hatch.
That's right.
We've got Supercars this weekend at Cadwell Park, and they're a phenomenal piece of kit. They're not very reliable, though.
Oh, okay. Some of them maybe not, yeah, but they're very, very fast. Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Very fast.
Yes, super lightweight.
I was just going to ask this question, actually, while we're talking about the different kart categories. It fits in quite nicely. Guy, in fact, talking about your dad, who used to run you and was doing that at the other side of the track, Pete Smith, he put the picture of the kart that we did in the virtual studio on Facebook, and someone he knows called Craig Coldwell commented underneath and said he'd like to know what kart and class, Terry, you enjoyed driving the most through your career, and I'll probably add championship into that.
Which kart and class?
Yeah.
Well, I drove always in the juniors. There was only one class when I raced. When I went to seniors, I raced in what they called 100 International, which was the top class. There was a national class and a Britain class. I raced in 100 International. So, you know, and through the 70s, that was what I raced, what they called 100 International. And that was a great class through those years. There'd only be one world championship. All the countries had come in. The 180 guys at the world championship from about, I don't know, 25 different nations, something like that. And it felt a very, very big deal. It felt like a real big race you're attending, this world championship. Watered down now. I mean, they have a Rotax kind of world championship, an IAMI world championship, an OK world championship. Karting's become quite diverse on that level, and there's probably 16 or 17 people walking around the go-kart tracks saying that they're world champions. It doesn't mean as much anymore. So, but the car I enjoyed driving the most, I suppose, the car that I had built by DAP in the late 70s, my car, was a Fullerton car. It was a brilliant car, a little bit ahead of its time. And that was the one that gave me the most satisfaction because I designed it, and it was my design. I put it, and there were some new innovative things there. It was the first chassis made out of 30 millimeters that was raced at a top level. It was the first chassis with a 30 millimeter axle right the way through it. So that was probably the car I enjoyed racing most.
Is there still as much innovation, Terry, in karting as there was?
It's kind of plateaued karting, and led by the Tony Kart company, which make a brilliant car. And they've been making this brilliant kart now for about 12 or 13 years, which has been really the benchmark for karts. And the other manufacturers, I mean, you know, have had through the years trouble, you know, producing something that's as good. So it's the benchmark of karting, the Tony Kart at the top level. So yeah, and innovation almost stopped about mid 2000s. You know, 2000 and at the end of the 90s. Kart design had almost reached its peak, and it's hardly changed since 2002, 2003. If you back to back a chassis of today from 2002, they're almost identical. So
is that because you can't add technology in because they've got?
Well, you can, but I think they kind of exhausted everything.
Right.
Even tyres, because it was so successful, the car, you know, when the manufacturers would make a tyre, they'd end up being tested on a Tony kart and they'd be tuned into that kart. So that was the car that went best on a new tyre, you know. So it's been a kind of a domination of numbers almost. I mean, it is a very good product, but they've dominated for a lot of reasons. I mean, when you get an average race of, say, 34 guys, even in England, you know, there's probably 22, 23 of them are on Tony karts, maybe even a few more. So they have by far the best chance of, you know, filling the top 10, which they do, which is the thing that keeps the ball rolling and people go back. And so, yeah, there was a lot of innovations through the 80s and 90s, I would say. But basically, when you say innovation, things just got bigger to cope with the grip. The tube size got bigger, the axles got bigger, the muscles in the fella's arms got bigger, everything got bigger. So, and then it kind of reached a peak, and it's kind of leveled out now, and they've stuck like 30 millimeter chassis, 50 millimeter axles, and that is kind of the benchmark now that everyone works around. So.
I saw some of your Bentley boys, Guy. Was it Jordan Pepper and Seb Morris have been on Tony karts at PF this week?
They have. They've been testing. Well, again, after lockdown, you know, as we said before, what better way to get race fit than?
I saw some guys there. I was on Friday. I saw some guys with Bentley on the back of the road.
They've all been having a go, been testing. So yeah, what better way to get on it? So yeah, they've been enjoying it. So. What do you think about all this stupid bodywork, Terry, that the karts have now?
I can tell what you think about it.
Well,
We call it stupid bodywork.
I mean, I think they should just do away. I mean, I think the side pods are fine. That's okay. You know, they look okay and everything else. But this whole thing about, I don't know if you're aware of it, Paul, but they have this thing like with the bumper now. So if you have contact, the bumper drops down, and
Really?
you get so effectively you then get a penalty at the end of the race. So, for example, people will be coming into Parc Ferme and brake testing the kart behind. He'll hit the bumper will drop down, and then they get a penalty. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I agree. It's not a good rule. They put the bumper on the front of the kart originally, and the side pods and plastic rear bumpers basically surrounded the kart with plastic. That was back in the 80s. They started doing that. I think the front nose came in the 90s.
Yeah,
but it might have been the late 80s. And, you know, you have to, I mean, I was aware of it at the time. You have to ask yourself, what were they doing, putting all this stuff around the go-kart? Why were they doing it? And my opinion was they were doing it to make it look like a little racing car, which it's not. It's not a little racing car. Karting's a sport apart from cars, and it's apart from motorbikes. It's different from cars, as bikes are almost, you know, to drive and to be involved with. But they were trying to make them look like all racing cars. It was, in my opinion, it was part of the strategy to make karting a stepping stone to cars.
Could they also put more sponsors on them, I suppose, if you've got...
Well, that's probably the only thing that you could say in their favour. It gives you some sponsorship space. But the front bumper has been, a point of conjecture so many times over the years. They put it on, it was held on solidly to start with. And basically, this bit of plastic, it's like a battering ram. It's perfect to whack people off. That's what it was like. And people used to whack other people off. And there was too much of that going on. It couldn't be policed properly. But that's because it was on. But rather than say, OK, that's not working, take it off, let's go with that. No, you didn't do that. They put on these little things. If you touch someone, now the bumper drops down, you get a penalty.
How does that work? Is it like a little bit of plastic?
A plastic thing that fits around two parts of the bar, and enough pressure on the front of the nose cone will push it in, and that lets it drop down. Once it's dropped down, you get a penalty. So that's the way everyone races now, and you'll see a race somewhere where you get the results printed out at the end of the final. 34 people have finished. 15 of these kids have got penalties, you know, a 3-second penalty or a 5-second penalty. I'm not quite sure what it is, but basically these 15 kids weren't trying to hit somebody else off. Karting's a semi-contact sport. You do end up touching people sometimes, especially in the rain. So at the end of the final, 15 of these kids got penalties. 15 of these kids have had their weekend ruined, and all the money and time and effort involved in it's ruined because of this stupid rule. That's my opinion, anyways.
Yeah.
The bumpers for me, bad idea. Front bumpers, bad idea. And like you say, the side pods were okay. They didn't do any harm. In fact, they were a genuine safety feature because you didn't get the interlocking wheel so much. But
back in your day, all you had was a number, wasn't it, on the front bar?
Yeah, it was all like fully open wheeled. Yeah, quite dangerous really when you go firing up inside of someone into the hairpin. Yeah.
But they look better. I think the cars look better then. The karts look better then. And also, actually, if you do a stupid move, the consequence was you ended up on your head. So actually, you had to think about if you're going to do a move, you had to get it done. Yeah. Whereas now it's all bumping and rubbing.
Yeah.
In some respects, you know, if you did something stupid or if you got too close to someone, you either went over the wheel and ended up launching yourself, or you ended up getting in a tangle and putting yourself out the race. So you was probably a bit more give and take in the racing, but you probably raced smarter. So
I think there was it's probably becoming an art now, driving not having your front bumper drop down.
Yeah.
When I was racing, through the period of time when I was racing, it was an art not interlocking your wheels and doing a Chinese acrobat thing up the straight, you know. So
did you do that often?
The consequences were much higher in those days. You're right. Yeah.
Did you do the Japanese somersault often, Terry?
If I had to guess, probably 20 times in my career.
Did you?
How about you, Guy?
Not too bad. I once had someone seize at the end of, actually, I think it was at Jeslo, at the end of the straight. I was behind Gianluca Malandrucco and his engine seized. I was right behind him and he just literally stopped dead. I went up his back wheel and ended up cartwheeling down the straight. And then I did it at Langbar as well. I ended up on my head, but yeah, enough times. But luckily came out of it okay. So
can we talk about these race suits behind you, Guy? Because one of them looks old enough to be a romper suit, and I understand that was your first kart suit.
Yeah, it's a pair of leathers, Sportac, Neil Hahn, is it? Neil Hahn, some Sportac leathers. And I can't get in those anymore, but this is my last race suit and I can still get in it. I was about 16 when I wore it. I can still get in it.
CRG, yeah.
CRG, yeah. But you would have been leathers Terry, weren't you, when you were driving?
Not at the beginning,
Right.
but there was a period, probably early 80s, when I used leather. Yeah, I used leather. Japanese suit called Torai. They were a very nice suit, actually.
Yeah.
I used leather for a bit, but at the end of the day, they were just a bit too hot, really.
The Supercars still use leather, actually. Now they're still on leather.
Yeah,
I'm going to share a picture, Guy, on Instagram. When this podcast goes out, if you're listening to this, it'll be Friday. I'm going to share a picture on Instagram of Guy wearing the pink suit when he was younger. It's the one with the hairdo. Hairdo like mine looks like now with lockdown hair that your dad shared with me.
Actually, Terry, while we're talking about suits, one of the questions I got was, you always wore an open face helmet. Is there any reason for that?
Yeah, well, I started off wearing one.
Yeah.
When I very first started karting, the sort of the height of fashion was a pudding basin type helmet.
Yeah.
Mid-60s, like Mike Hellwood type style, So, and I didn't really like. In fact, my brother Alec wore one of those on his bike to start with, and he changed to like the American shape, which came down here. And I thought it was much better. It was a lot cooler and everything. So when I first started karting, which would be a couple of years after Alec passed away. I had immediately had I think it was a Lewis helmet or a Bell helmet, I can't quite remember. And the best thing to put on that was a bubble visor, because the goggles kind of restricted vision a bit. So we used a bubble visor. I thought it looked pretty cool. You could get tinted ones. And the big thing about the open face helmet was you had brilliant vision, peripheral vision. I can't say that properly. Peripheral vision and vision basically everywhere. So in karting, when someone sort of fires out the inside of you, you need to know where their wheels are. And with this type of helmet, motor racing helmet, you don't see the wheels in the car. So that was why I stayed with it. It was great vision, especially peripheral vision.
It's not often in these podcasts, Guy, where I have a technical story that I can jump in with that actually fits in with what's just been said. But in this one, I have the very first kart helmet in my display at Cadwell Park in the office. Do you remember a guy called Bob Armiger at all? Did you ever come across him? He did a lot of long circuit karting when that was a thing back in early days. And they used to race with no helmet. And Freddie Frith and Mike Hellwood used to go and watch. And Freddie Frith was a big bike racer, of course. But he was a big friend of this guy, Bob Armiger, who's our oldest. He's 94. He's our oldest fan at Cadwell Park. Still comes and watches. And he said, "This is ridiculous. You kids racing around with no helmets on, these little leather kind of straps around your head. Here, have my helmet." So I gave him this really famous helmet. Anyone knows that Freddie Frith, that helmet was worth quite a bit now. And Bob painted a big gold line down the middle of it, and that was always his filler after that. It was a pudding helmet, like you mentioned, with a little leather strap under it. And we've got that thing. Yeah, and they're scary. They're really scary. They're not going to do a lot if you end on your own head.
Mm-hmm.
So Terry, obviously you've had you've had an amazing career. I mean, multiple British champion, world champion, European champion. In terms of races, then, what would you consider? I'm sure you get asked this quite a bit, but what would you consider your sort of one of your best race?
Well, I suppose the one that sticks out for obvious reasons is when I won the world championship. I only won it once. I was in the running to win it about 4 times or 5 times, but I only ended up winning it once.
Was that a battle with Goldstein again?
Yes, 73. Yeah, it was. But the one that sticks out when people ask me, and they ask me about Senna, and this was a race at Jesolo, 1980 Champions Cup at Jesolo. That's probably the race that sticks out, especially in those 3 years when I raced with Ayrton. That race sticks out big time because I managed to pass him on the last lap to win that Champions Cup race, so that championship, and that had repercussions and all sorts of things. But it was a great race from my point of view. He'd gone into the distance, and I'd settled in the second really, but I was plodding away. I'd left the guy in third, and with about half the race to go, I realised that Ayrton wasn't pulling away anymore. And after a little lap or two, I realised I was starting to gain on him. So obviously very determined, grit my teeth, kept my head down, gaining about 2/10, 3/10 a lap, something like that. And with 3 or 4 laps to go, I realised that I was almost certainly going to catch him before the end of the race. From a driver's point of view, how fired up you get, with that when you get catching someone. Not just the fact you're catching them, it looks like you're going to catch them before the end of the race and you can have an opportunity to try and get by and win a very big race. The Champions Cup was more or less the biggest race in the world, apart from the World Championship in those days. So it was a big deal. And I did catch him on the last lap, and he blocked as you'd expect him to do, but I managed to find a way around him. Into the first hairpin, down at, he blocked on the start and finish straight.
Yeah.
And I went to the outside. We kind of crossed over on the apex of that fast right-hander at the end of the straight there.
Yeah.
I managed to get my front wheels inside, but he was closing all the way down the hairpin, closing towards you. I just kept going. We had a little touch on the way in. He went up 2 wheels and I got past him. And then he lost a little bit of momentum. I don't know, 8 yards, something like that, 10 yards. I looked round and he was far enough back that I knew he couldn't have a go anymore. Just completed the lap and won the race.
Amazing.
And, that really set our that finished off any sort of friendship we had, or any
Was he pissed off?
possibility of working together properly in the future. That actually ended all that. So and also almost split the DAP team in two, because they become favourable to him at that stage.
Yeah.
And he had a knack to make people like him and help him, and he worked that very well at that point. And he was getting, very, very good treatment from him at that stage. They really wanted him to win, not me, but it didn't work out for him.
Yeah, yeah. So Terry, in terms of car racing, was that something that you would have, wanted to do? I mean, obviously you didn't have the opportunities. Is it something that you kind of, wanted to move into, or you always kind of happy with the karting, or?
Well, from being a kid, like a teenager, right the way through to winning a world championship. After that, when I was a professional driver, I never even thought about racing a car. It was, karting for me was its own sport, it was its own world, and I just wanted to be successful and a professional driver in that. And right up to the end, I never really thought about doing cars. So it's not the same anymore. People, obviously, they start off when they're 7 or 8 years old, and mum and dad, they've got their eye on Formula One even at that age. But it wasn't like that back in those days. So
you talked about the repercussions as well from that race. What sort of repercussions happened? You talked about the team splitting in two. What happened after that race, Terry?
Didn't completely split in two. I stayed on DAP till the end of the year. Senna was on DAP. We had a world championship at the end of that year. And I won the first final, and Ayrton won the second final. And we both kind of messed up, or something went wrong in the third final. And eventually a guy called De Bruin, who was another excellent driver, won it from Holland. But the whole of the races after the Jesolo Champions Cup in 1980, we weren't under the same awning anymore. He didn't want to be anywhere near me. And so we kind of did our own thing almost. He was completely backed by the DAP people, and I had my own English, or actually New Zealand and Australian mechanics. And so we kind of did our own thing. We were the only two people that were completely backed by DAP, but we were doing separate things almost. Definitely not friends anymore.
So when in Formula One, he had the famous spat with Prost, and he had these fallings out and these fiery emotional outbursts. You could probably sit there when you're watching that on TV and relate to that.
Yeah, completely, absolutely, completely, yeah. And there were several things about him that I heard Prost say. I mean, he's a special guy. That's why we're talking about him now. So that's absolutely, unique, special racing driver. But there were several parts of his personality where, one in particular, which I heard Prost talk about, and I saw as well, where he could actually do something, or something would occur on the track, or he'd be involved in an incident, and he would actually genuinely see something completely different. He wouldn't comprehend at all that, black was black and white was white at some stage. He would see something completely different to what happened, and he was completely convinced himself he was correct. I can give you an example of him and Prost. It was San Marino Grand Prix, where he overtook Prost into the first corner. Anybody know about this? He overtook Prost. They'd agreed beforehand that after the start, whatever position they were in, they would stay in that around the first corner. There was a restart, but nothing had changed. That should still have been the case. And after the restart, Senna passed Prost in the first corner. Then after the race, he denied that he'd overtaken him. But 6 million people around the world or whatever had seen him overtake him. And Prost actually related that story. And I remember things very similar, in fact, from that race at Jesolo, from Ayrton, where he saw that incident where I overtook. It wasn't really an incident, it was just a good overtake. He saw that as me smashing him off the track or something. It really wasn't like that at all. He would see things his own way and couldn't be swayed at all. So yeah, they're two similarities between me and Ayrton and Prost and Ayrton.
Fantastic. I love these stories of the legends that we get out of this podcast guy who talks about.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's really great. And then Terry, so when you finished sort of karting and moved into sort of building, you started doing your own chassis, building your own kart, the Fullerton kart, and running Alan. Was Alan the first guy that you kind of ran then, McNish?
Alan McNish, you were talking about.
Yeah.
He was the first one I ran after I stopped racing. He was the first guy I ran kind of on a full-time basis. Yeah, because I got a go-kart made in England, and he raced that car. And he won the British Junior Championship the first year and the British Senior Championship the second year. So he totally dominated sort of British international karting.
I remember growing up, when I started karting, because I started probably 85, 86. And like I said, McNish was winning everything in the sort of black and red Fullerton kart, little Scotch guy he had his leathers on with his tartan band helmet, which he's still got now. Mm-hmm. And like you said, he's such a tiny little guy. But he literally just to win. He was winning everything. I mean, it was amazing. And the kart always looked, with the green, with the green, red, and black, it all looked, really, really good.
Yeah, he was an exceptional kart driver, Alan. Very, very good kart, very fast.
He's like a little terrier, isn't he? He's he's a little terrier.
Yeah, aggressive, like you say, little terriers kind of. Determination. Yeah.
And he did well because was he third in the World Championships as well?
He came third in the world at Le Mans.
Schumacher
Schumacher was second, I think, and
Gilardi
won it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Alan was very good, very, very gifted driver. I've got a lot of memories of him. For instance, I think the juniors we had the same wet tyres as the seniors, but nowhere near as much power as the seniors. And if it rained and we were testing in the rain, he'd just drive around the outside of all the seniors and things like that. He was that quick that we were always being accused of cheating. That, he had dodgy tyres or something like that. Yeah. Never ever did. I used to say, well, if you think we're cheating, buy these tyres, give me 30 quid for the tyres. They didn't want to do that. It was just Alan was phenomenally quick.
Yeah, and he ran him, and then he went into seniors as well, didn't he? Super.
Yeah. He ruffled a lot of feathers that year as well, because juniors aren't supposed to come out of juniors and go to seniors and beat all the established guys, but he did. Yeah. And I remember the thing about tyres was he won the first Super 1 championship or race that year. So for the second race, they introduced a part firm A for tyres, and you could tell the sort of buzz around the pits. Oh, he's in trouble now. And he completely dominated that second round as well. So they were really scratching their heads at the end of that one. And he went on to win the British Championships.
It must be
Did you get as much satisfaction? Sorry, guys. Did you get as much satisfaction of winning races as a team manager, as a team owner, as you did as a driver?
Absolutely not. Sorry to dispel any ideas you might have. But no, it's much better to win as a driver. I enjoyed it much more as a driver. I'm probably a massive egotist or something, but no, I much preferred being a driver. And when I stopped driving, for all the reasons that I stopped driving, it kind of felt like I'd had an arm chopped off or a leg chopped off. I really didn't feel a complete person for a lot of years. Probably come back to sort of some kind of normality 3 or 4 or 5 years after I'd stopped. So, but yeah, the running, it was just like you come off heroin and you're on, what do they put them on, methadone or something? It was on a substitute drug, which was running somebody else. So, right. But no, the bit of my life that was best was when I was a driver, 100%.
We'll ask you that in a few years, Guy.
I just keep dragging it on. So Terry, would you, when you stopped, was it your decision to stop, or were you ready to stop at that point, or?
Yeah, it was kind of slightly forced on me by outside pressures of not pressures from individuals, but I had 3 great years, 78, 79 and 80. Some of those years I won almost every single race I did. 1980, apart from the World, I won, as far as I remember, every big race I did. Hong Kong and Jesolo, all those races, big race I won. 81, it changed to 135 for no real good reason other than that we're winning too much. Go figure what happened there. But and then from that point onwards, I was fighting an uphill battle on equipment. I couldn't get a drive with Grama. He wouldn't pay me. He didn't want me to go there. Yeah. So I drove for PCR on Zipcar, and I was able to earn a living there. But the equipment, but really especially the motors, weren't up to it. So I did quite a few years or races and races where the engines weren't fast enough and they were braking a lot as well. So, but I didn't have the option to move to the equipment that Mike Wilson was on.
Yeah.
Because Grana wouldn't employ me. He didn't want me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those reasons, really, and by the time 1984 came along, and there's still been no real progress with the PCR engines or any other engine apart from the Comet that Grana owned, I decided to pack up because I couldn't bear another year like that. So.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what a great sport though, Terry, isn't it? I mean, karting, I mean, you know, all the drivers I speak to now that have gone into cars and stuff, I mean, everybody, we talk a lot, and then whenever we talk about karting, their eyes light up. And it's like, I don't know if it's because it's the childhood and, you know, different memories, but everybody only has great things to say about karting. You know, the fact that you're racing in Europe and around the world, and like you said, Hong Kong and all these different places, America. But, you know, and we talked before about some of the Bentley drivers that have been testing at PF and stuff, because people love to come back to it because it's so pure. And, you know, still have the politics and the bullshit. Of course you do, because you get that in any sport. But, you know, when you're in a kart and you're driving it and you can feel all the vibrations and you can feel all the sensations, there's nothing better to getting back in a car. It by far beats being in a car.
I'm sure. I haven't driven that many cars, but I would agree with you. And
yeah,
when I see the guys come back and do track days with us, you know, some of the Formula 3 guys or whatever, they come back and they're in heaven. They absolutely love it. You know, they have the best day they've had for years when they do a track day in a go-kart.
Yeah.
So, you know, Ahmed came and did a track day the other day with us, and he's off to the F3 European Championship now, but he loved that day. He hurt his ribs a little bit, so he couldn't do another one before he went away. But he had a great day. He had a great day.
Yeah.
When you changed from karts to cars, I know you went the single-seater route to begin with. Did you miss karts? Did you miss that? I know you had the dad and lad thing as well. Did you miss that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole karting thing. I mean, that whole. I think we were in a good era. Like, you know, I fought very hard against Terry, because obviously I raced against Ralph Furman, who Terry ran pretty much not long after he finished with Alan McNish. He was running Ralph Furman for what, 4 or 5 years. Terry, did you run him?
4 years.
Yeah, and I remember, you know, like, I mean, he was obviously, you know, he was pretty green because he'd not done a lot of racing, but within 4 years he went from being sort of a kid with not much of a clue to start with. He was quick, but no real sort of experience, used to crash a lot and stuff. By the end of it, he was like, you know, the real deal. And you know, I that was probably down, you know, pretty much down to Terry. I remember you being a hard taskmaster. I used to sort of almost see Ralph occasionally, you know, hung up by his ears in the awning, you know, getting a beating.
No, we never did. Come on, we never did.
But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it made him harder. It made him tougher, because you had to be tough, and you made it, you know, he became a very, very good driver. And in fact, you know, I remember Ralph used to have a bell helmet with a like a big open visor, you know, like a wide opening. And I remember asking him about it. He said it had better visibility. So that's why it's interesting about. I wonder whether that came from you and what you said.
Probably, yeah.
Because obviously you ran Ralph. You ran so many great drivers. I mean, obviously you ran Ralph. I remember Johnny Eastwood. When you ran Johnny Eastwood, he was quick as well.
Yeah, the little boy, Johnny.
The Irish kid.
Yeah. He was good. Yeah, I've seen him recently actually. Yeah, but yeah, he was quite good.
Obviously, Dario's been on your stuff. DeResta, Davidson. I mean, you've had some really great drivers.
Yeah, there's quite a few. So when I try and think about it, actually, I forget quite a lot of good ones, which is a bit embarrassing. But there are quite a few. I've got a list here actually. Got Manish. You know, did you know I ran your man Jason Plato?
Really?
Did he mention that? He didn't.
Oh no, he did. He said give Terry a hug from me, didn't he, on Twitter?
Oh, yeah. He wants to hug me now.
Yeah, he does want to hug you. Did he not back in the day?
I ran Jason for a little while. Not much actually, 2 or 3 races. I can't remember how it worked out, but I do remember he was quick.
Yeah, there you go, Jason. We've delivered
Ralph
on
Furman, Mike Simpson.
Yeah,
I was involved with Justin Wilson for a whole year.
Yeah.
Danny Weldon drove my equipment. I didn't directly run him, but he drove my equipment for a while. He won the World Cup on it in Japan, actually.
Right.
Anthony Davison for 2 years.
Yeah.
Mike Conway for 2 years. Ricky Christo, he raced for about 3 years.
He's quick lad, isn't he?
And then more recently, Jake Dennis won the CIK Under-18 World Championship when I was running it, and the British Championship. Callan O'Keefe won the British Junior Championship, 2nd in the world when I was involved with coaching him. And then the Force India boys, I ran them, was involved with them for 3 years. Jayhan Daruvala won the British Junior the last year I was involved with him. So.
Yeah.
So you've quite a few kids from
Do you enjoy working with the kids, like sort of the coaching stuff? Do you enjoy that?
Yes, that side of it I do. If I can form a good relationship with a kid, doesn't always happen. You know, sometimes you don't gel with someone, but when you do, and you know, there's some respect there on both sides, and you work well together. You know, things click into place. It's great. I enjoy it. I enjoy doing that a lot. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as I say, it doesn't always happen. I was in New Zealand this winter. I coached about 7 kids, maybe 8 kids, and it was interesting because I looked from the outside sort of perspective at it, and I think about 4 of them went really well. 1 of them was pretty average, and 2 or 3 of them didn't do anybody any good at all. And that's probably a reasonable average, I would say. If you think of a teacher in a classroom, 2 or 3 really bright kids, and they're brilliant. And then you got 4 or 5 or 6 that work well, and you can bring them on, and they're good to work with too. Then you got the sort of the vast majority that don't really want to be there, and then you got 5 or 6 dickheads at the back that bits around all the time. So you know, the spread you get of people to help as a coach is very similar.
Yeah. So, interesting you say respect. What else do you need? What other ingredients do you need for that relationship to work in order for those kids to progress and become decent kart racers, and then, you know, they're in racing drivers?
From my experience with me, it's actually pretty important that their first language is English. If you're teaching a kid an Italian boy or someone like that, the meanings of words and that don't come across quite right, and it's harder to get your point across. So, from my point of view,
does Tossa not sound the same in Italian?
Well, that's the same, isn't it? But no, there's something gets lost in the translation. You know, you do that, and he goes, "What do you mean that?" You know, so I don't know. Something does get lost in the translation.
Probably need to watch this bit on YouTube to fully understand it.
Yeah. Sorry?
I was saying that people have to watch this bit on YouTube to fully understand it.
Yes, probably. Yeah, they will. Yeah, so the hand movements. But yeah, the respect thing is just, you know, it comes down. You know, if I like the kid and he likes me, then you get on well, and you're doing something together. You know, and he has a certain amount of faith and trust in me, and I have a certain amount of faith and trust in the kid, and you work together and you try and bring the best out of each other. And if you do that, you generally, I always sort of put it to them that you're putting yourself on a kind of the upward escalator. You know, we're going to work together, we're going to get something sorted, you're going to go a bit better. When you go better, you're going to get a better result. After that better result, your confidence begins to build, and you move on to the next race with a higher level of confidence and probably a higher level of skill and ability. So you're likely to go even better at the next race, etc., etc. So that's what I try and work towards, that kind of end result if I can.
Yeah.
I say,
Guy, for you, is it the same? Is it, you know, you've built some fantastic relationships which have done you proud, and through your career you've managed to step up and use stepping stones because of those relationships. What are they based on? Is it respect? Is there something else as well once you get to cars?
What you mean, when I was a driver, or as a driver coach?
About both of you, really. To Guy as well, you know, in his career, what is it that you need in order to be able to keep those relationships and for them to mean something when you're stepping up and you're taking on new challenges, I suppose?
Guy, do you want to go?
Well, it was just I think it's you get to the point where, like what Terry says, is like with the confidence, it's a case of it's like stepping stones. You don't just suddenly get the confidence overnight. So you have to start, like, if you finish 10th in a race, if you finish 8th the next weekend, right, that's progress. You're right, you finish top 5 next time. You know, if you get in the top 5, that's progress. It's realistic steps, and eventually you build, because you can't suddenly go from 10th to 1st. It's too big a step. So it's all about building confidence, and it takes time, and you build the self-belief. And it's amazing, actually. The speed might already be there, but if you've got that self-belief and that confidence, it's amazing how that can carry you. You know, the hardest thing is, once you actually won a couple of races, is maintaining that momentum, because, you know, you then expect you to perform all the time. So you've got to work at it all the time. And I think, like when we've spoken to other people in the podcast, it's that work ethic again. It's that, you know, once you get there, just because you're now winning races doesn't mean to say you have to stop working. You probably have to work even harder, and you have to, you know, look for the smaller things to improve yourself and to get better on. And it gets harder, actually, the further up you get. But I think what Terry says, it's, you know, he's always been very good with the drivers in you know, he's like, I saw it with Ralph Furman, his confidence grew and grew and grew. And he got to the point where his confidence was almost he almost had too much confidence. He was almost super confident, you know, that he would just go for any gap. You know, he got so brave and so confident. But you needed to have that, you know, you needed to have that. And some people have it instilled in them, and have a certain amount of confidence. Some don't, so you have to build it, you know, and everybody's different. And I'm sure Terry will agree that it's kind of analysing the character and saying, well, what kind of person are you and what do you need? Because everybody's different. Nobody is the same. So he might need a bit of an arm around him. He might need a kick up the bum, depending on, you know, what they need. And we're all the same. We're all human. We all have good days and bad days. So it's all about managing and understanding yourself as well, knowing what you need to perform and do. You know, we all have good days and bad days, but.
Yeah, I also think, you know, you almost said it there, but, you know, being honest with yourself about things. In karting, you know, there's, with the young kids coming through, so often you hear, you know, oh, he turned in on me. I mean, how many times you go, he turned in on me? No, he didn't turn in on me. You braked too late, you shot on the inside, and you ran all over him. You know, so, but they'll see the incident or whatever happened from the perspective that saves their ego, saves their tears, you know, and the fathers will often back them up and this sort of. And that's just wrong, you know. You've got to be honest about what's gone on and learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, like the one thing that everyone says about history is you got to learn from it. You know, you can't just forget about it. So when you made a mistake on the track, just don't come in and tell yourself it wasn't your fault. Work out what went wrong and how to make sure it doesn't go wrong next time.
Yeah.
That's the mental approach that you know to build a steady, good driver, I think. You know?
Yeah.
Of course, with zero ability, you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
Zero money, you're never going to get there. There's a lot of things you need to come together to make a package that will move forward. And like with Ralph, for instance, the one you cited with Ralph, you know, I was with him for 4 years. That's a lot of time to work with a kid.
Yeah.
Especially when he's growing. I think when I first helped him, he was probably 13 or 14 years old, and then I finished with him when he was about 18 years old. So you know they're the big growing years for a human. You know, from go 14.
And he grew.
He went from a boy to a man, really. You know, in that period of time. So you know, there's a lot to work with there. There's a lot of things that you can form and change, and his ability grew and grew, and it's like you say, his confidence grew with that, and the two went together. So yeah.
Just another question, actually, from Big Stanners. This is also on Twitter. You touched on this, actually, both with your analogy about Italian racers and also with the differences between karting and car racing. How can Italy, this is the question, how can Italy produce so many top quality kart racers but not have had an F1 race winner for over a decade and a world champion in a lifetime?
Yeah, that is a bit of a strange one, isn't it? I agree. I think England, actually, or Britain, you have to include Scotland in that for sure. Some reason or other, turns out, you know, probably the best drivers. If you look at, if you look over the years, you know, over the last say 50 or 60 years, England has really churned out more than anybody. I think someone will probably put me right on that, but that's my impression. Italy, they do very well in karting because the base of the industry is in northern Italy.
Right.
So the kids grow up in a very professional environment with their karting there, and you know, the very best equipment, the very best teams, etc., etc. So kind of got a little bit of a head start on that one. And that, you know, a few years ago made a big difference, maybe a little less now. But so I think they kind of had an advantage there in karting, but then that advantage will probably disappear a bit when they get in the cars, because that isn't the case with the manufacturing base for cars. In fact, once you get to the higher levels of Formula One, the teams are all based in England, etc. You know, so yeah. But, you know, I think that is partly to do with it. They show very well as kart drivers, and then not quite so well when they move to cars for that reason.
Okay, it's maybe something to do with the governing bodies in those countries as well, because the Motorsport UK and obviously the karting associations in Britain, they tend to work quite well to create a stepping stone, a real career path, don't they? And it's not the case in France do the same thing, but it's not the case in all countries, is it?
No, probably not. I'm sure it's not, but the CIK as well. I mean, they have their own agenda. It's not, you know, their own agenda isn't always 100% for what's best for the drivers. Italy as well. I mean, it's very industry based. You know, the industry is very powerful and very important. So a lot of the rules, you know, are based around what's best for them. So England hasn't got that problem in karting really, because we haven't really got any manufacturer anymore, apart from Gillard is the only one I can think of that races internationally. So whereas there's a dozen kart manufacturers in northern Italy, and you know 5 or 6 engine manufacturers. So you know the heart of karting industry is northern Italy, and their rules and regulations and all that are governed very strongly by that. That's where the money is. You know, they control. They control the press, they control the governing bodies, etc., etc. I mean, the governing bodies won't like hearing me say that, but that is almost certainly the case. And I know from things that have happened that is the case. And I even know from magazines that the big companies decided they weren't going to advertise in anymore, just almost for a very small thing, you know, almost bankrupted the magazine, etc. So they're very powerful, the manufacturers. I mean, I won't name names, but one in particular, very, very powerful. And also, you know, the big three, Tony Kart, CRG and Birrell, the real heartbeat of industry really throughout the world, to be honest. Yeah. That's a very strong force and forms a lot of the attitudes and even the regulations in karting.
Some good questions from our listeners for this podcast. You really got people thinking there, Terry.
Okay.
Paul, have some questions?
Yeah, I think we should. We've had all the questions from our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram followers. So on to the quick fire ones, Guy.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm looking through these. I can imagine the answers. So Terry, basically, I was going to ask you a few questions. Just first thing that comes into your mind.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
It is if you're following Jason Plato, actually.
Yeah. Jesus. Okay. Top gear or fifth gear?
Top gear.
100cc or gearbox karts? I know the answers.
100cc.
Beach holiday or adventure holiday?
Adventure holiday.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
There we go, Paul.
Yeah, we have one cat so far.
Oversteer or understeer?
Oversteer.
Goldstein or Wilson?
Oh, pass.
Yeah, I don't know. Are we allowing passes?
Okay, Goldstein.
Yeah. Birrell or Dap?
Sorry?
Birrell or Dap?
Birrell.
Okay. That's good. Well,
we have got a pass along, haven't we? Which is yeah.
I've got a pass along question from Andy Prio, and his was very, very simply, blondes or brunettes?
Oh, I suppose natural blondes.
Natural blondes.
It's got to be natural.
He could have had both, to be fair, but that's.
Yeah. Well, let's say
both.
your
answer, Guy.
No, that was Andy's answer. He said both, but I mean that's just being greedy.
Yeah, I'm not that fussy. No,
Joe, do you have a pass-on question for our next guest? I think I know who it's going to be, but I can't tell you.
Okay, but I did write something down before. I tried to think of something interesting. I said, I mean, it's going to be someone in motorsport who's had a career. There's not going to be someone at the beginning of their career, is it? So I said, looking back, what would you have done differently in your career? What one thing would you have done differently in your career? Which sometimes is quite a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've not had a retrospective question in that sense.
Why don't we throw that back to Terry and ask him?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, one thing would I have done differently?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been asked this question before. It's always sort of troubles me a bit, this one, because there's more than one thing I would have done differently.
Well, I think
the way I was as a personality, as a person in karting, I couldn't really control. That was kind of out of my control. That's whatever came out was what was there. So the fact that I wasn't liked very much, I was considered a moody bastard and not very social, and that I'll live with that because I couldn't do anything different on that one. But there were some bad decisions I made. I kind of let my ego get in the way of a good decision a few times, and they did affect my career. I thought I could, at one stage, in the late 70s, when I probably was, I won't say it, but I was right at the top of karting at that stage. I believed I was better than anybody. I thought I could drive a number of different sets of equipment and still win. And I was wrong. I couldn't. When it moved to 135, I couldn't win on the equipment I had. So, and I had so much self-belief that I kept that going for probably 2 or 3 years, thinking, we do enough testing, we can get this sort and that. And it never happened because the army guys were doing their testing and moving forward in a more professional way, etc. And they did a better job. So, yeah, I think I'd have made a few different decisions and bitten my lip and swallowed my ego a little bit a few times to make a better long-term decision.
But to be clear, you still would have sent it up the inside of Ayrton.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, as long as we're talking about the same thing. Yeah, first hairpin at Jesolo. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, there's not many people that can say that they've lunged Senna and come out on the right side of it. So
No, it did cause a few problems at the time, though. But there we go. You wouldn't expect anything different. You know that move that Senna did on Prost in Japan when he out the inside.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of talk about that. When you see the aerial shot, you see pretty clearly that Prost moves over on him. You know, if you look at it really closely, actually, you see as he's just about to make contact with Senna, as he's moving into Senna, not on the normal line at all, he actually moves his head away from Senna because he knows there's going to be an impact. Yeah. Has anybody seen that aerial shot of that?
I've not looked that closely at it. I do know
the aerial shot of it. It becomes very clear, really, what happened there. Because Senna had more or less done him. It was a really good move. Prost saw him coming and closed the door because he knew the result when they both stopped. So, but that was pretty similar, but the other way round in Jesolo, because it was a very, very similar move. You know, just about the same amount up the inside. We touched somehow or other in the car. If you're on the inside and you mean a little bit more business than the guy on the outside, you always come out on top in a go-kart. Whereas in a car, something breaks.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Your wishbones end up a real mess. So, so that's, you know, same situation, different outcome.
Great.
That's a great note to end on.
Okay, so I think that was great. Well, thanks, Terry. It's been an absolute blast. It's great catching up with you. It's been a long time, but you know, I could talk to you all day about karting. It's obviously very close to my heart, and you know, really dearly miss it. But it's great hearing your stories, and you know, got huge respect for everything that you've done in karting, because I know, you know, just how difficult it is. You know, to get a world championship is something that I was never able to do, and not many people have been able to do since, certainly from the UK. But you know, for you to do that is a fantastic achievement, and yeah, a lot of respect for you. So,
well, thanks, thank you very much. Funny that I won the world championship when I was 20, and but the best bit of my karting career was 5 or 6 years later. The years with Senna, they're the best. They had better results that year, apart from the world championship, than the year I won the world championship. So, yeah, there we go.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast or you're watching on YouTube, if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review, a 5-star review. Guy quite likes his 5-star reviews, don't you, Guy? And keep sharing the content for us, guys, because like I say, we started this just something to do, I think, was how we first talked about it, wasn't it, Guy? And you guys have really loved it as much as we've enjoyed putting these together. So please do share, subscribe on YouTube, on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. And we've got more great stories like these, believe me, coming up in the next few weeks, Guy.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it. Got some good guests coming up, and I said really enjoyed this one with Terry, and you know, looking forward to the next one.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.